So, in Marcia and I's daily reading, we're reading through Deuteronomy, and I'm struck by the story of Moses, God, and God's people, and the time when God's people were so rebellious, God decided to wipe them out and start again with Moses and his progeny to build his people. Well, this is Steve Ridgell thinking about what that means for, well, church leaders, family leaders. It's really hard to get your ego out of the way. Moses had to be frustrated with the people he was leading for God. Their rebellion, their commitment to God that withered away quickly, had to be so frustrated. And then for God to say, you know what, I've had it with them. They're not going to listen. I will start a new people with you. Well, okay, God, thank you. I'll be humble and I'll try to lead them. Wow. And I'm struck with so many parallels for those of us that lead communities of faith, those of us who lead families. It's hard to get your ego out of the way. Great leaders, first of all, follow God. And boy, Moses had a lot of issues. You know that all Moses' issues. The anger. He battled anger all the way through. But I'm really struck when the chips were down and the pressure was really there. Moses interceded. And somebody says, well, that's because he was modest. Maybe, but I don't think that was it. One of the reasons he gives, he says, God, don't do that because people will say you couldn't do what you said you'd do. You said you'd give this land to the people. You had to wipe them out. You couldn't do what you said. Moses was concerned about God's reputation, about how he appeared to the world. You know, there's some great lessons for leaders and all that. One is always be a little bit humble. Man, nobody's going to come to me and say, hey, we messed this up so bad, we're going to start again and with you. And that's not going to happen. But you know what? Leaders do need to watch our ego. We do. Keep your ego in check. It is not about you. It is not your church. It's really not even your family if you're a Christian. It's God's family. It's God's church. So always remember that. A second thing I think is really helpful for leaders to remember is sometimes God's people are going to rebel. Churches go through cycles. Boy, everybody's fired up and they're doing what God wants, and then they sometimes get concerned with playing church house, keeping the church intact, doing what's best for the church. And they kind of forget that it's God's people, not your people. And then we always ought to remember we're in all this to serve God. Well, if you're a leader, your prime thing is to serve God. Churches can sometimes be like any large organization. The larger the organization, the more important it becomes to preserve the organization. And you forget sometimes what your original ministry was. I tell people all the time, I've rarely met, there have been some, but most of the doctors, nurses, pharmacy techs, housekeepers in hospitals, and almost all of them are great people and do anything for you. But as an organization, they make horrible decisions that are not good for people. Organizations protect the organization. That's the nature of the bigger you get. And somebody says, yeah, but churches aren't. Yeah, churches do it too. So it's a good lesson for me to read through and hear Moses and remember three things. Leaders, watch your ego. Leaders, remember it is all about God. And sometimes your people are going to frustrate you and you need to call them back to God. So as hard as that is, if I can just remember that, it is not about me. It is always about God. And that's what I call my people to. Then you may be ready to be a leader of your family and of God's family. This is Steve Ridgell, thanking God that it's about him and not me.